Hey guys, KT here from Paintucation. Today, we got a bit of a blast from the past. I've got some video that I chased up from 20 years ago. It's gonna blow your mind. Hey guys, thanks for watching. KT here. And don't forget to like and subscribe, and tell your friends to like and subscribe to these videos, and check out some of the content on the past videos too. So I put out a short post asking for some ideas for questions that you might have that maybe I could try and answer on here. And somebody was asking about how to deal with old trim parts, stainless steel, aluminum, how to pick and file and repair them. And I thought to myself, I got video on that. So I dug through some old hard drives and I found it. It's video lessons from 2004. There's a whole section on metal finishing techniques at the end and a ton of other good things. Paint touch-ups, chip repairs, brake calipers, show detailing, polishing, single-stage metallics, tan metallic color on a 36 Packard that I eventually restored the body and paint work on. And this car looks like this now. It's beautiful, and I'm so proud of the way the paint job turned out on it. So when you look in the background, you're going to see my old big block Ranchero, the 36 Packard, Jeff Ford's 66 Ranchero on a rotisserie, where I was doing a bunch of articles from modified Mustangs and Fords. And so for me, it's a trip down memory lane for sure. But you know what? The information's still valid, so I'm going to show it in this episode and in some others coming up with different topics. So here's the other thing. I look like I was 12 years old, and I was a little bit shorter, and my hair was shorter, but yeah, I've cut a few more lines in my face, but it's so fun to go back and see this stuff. Anyway, at the end of this video, we're going to answer some more of your questions, so stick around till the end and check it out. And we're also putting together a whole episode of Q&A questions where I can give you my best opinions and show some examples of some techniques and tools and information that I've collected over the years and try and help you solve your problems. And in the meantime, check out me looking brand new. Uncoated plastic moldings, handles, and mirrors can dull and stain over time, but they can be revived. It's a simple process with Plastic Renew. You simply clean the surface and scrub the raw plastic with the supplied steel wool, being careful not to scratch the paint around the handle or molding. After that, you apply 2 to 3 coats of the Plastic Renew liquid. It etches into the pores of the plastic and leaves a cleaned and brightened look. Factory Color Match touch-up paint is readily available from most automotive retailers and makes touching up rock chips a snap. It costs a fraction of what professional paints do to have mixed, and there's even an all-in-one repair kit available that comes with filler, primer, prep materials, and clear coat. All you do is add the color. It's important to repair the rock chips as they happen so rusting doesn't start. This is just one more reason to inspect your vehicle often, repair damage as it happens, and protect your investment. This scratch on the rocker panel is a good example of a typical paint scratch. First, I clean the surface in and around the scratch to prep for painting. If you've got crud in your chip or scratch, or if there's rust starting to form, this fiberglass sanding pen is fantastic for prep. The strands of glass reach down into the crevice and clean very effectively. A scuff pad works well too, but this is much more precise. Now I use another factory matched touch-up color to fill in the scratch. You don't want to apply too much or it'll run. Just do one coat at a time. After it's dry to the touch, which usually takes about 5 minutes, apply another heavier coat. Your goal here is to bring the level of the new paint above the existing finish, so a 3rd or 4th coat may be necessary depending on the depth of the scratch. Now I wet sand the repair with 1500 grit paper to level everything together. You don't want to bear down too hard, so use light pressure and lots of water. I check my progress by drying the panel, and I'm ready for compounding.
Medium-grade rubbing compound is used to polish the gloss back into the area. This requires some elbow grease and may need several applications of compound to get full gloss. The finished look is an invisible repair. Solid colors are almost always successful, but metallics are usually more of a compromise and won't tolerate much sanding before polish. Since we're talking about paint codes, here's some common locations for different manufacturers. For newer Chrysler vehicles, check the driver's door ID decal. For older Chryslers, check the radiator support metal tag or cowl screen tag. For Nissan, check the driver's side hinge pillar decal. For Toyota, check the driver's side latch pillar decal. Most GM passenger cars have an ID tag with code information in the trunk, but trucks and vans usually have this information in the glove compartment. For Fords, check the driver's door jamb ID tag. With most aftermarket and some OE wheels, you can see right through to the brake calipers, which don't always look their best. Here's a quick and effective detail for dingy-looking brake calipers and drums. These kits come in a variety of colors, but the procedures are the same for all. Using the supplied cleaner, carefully clean the surface of the caliper of brake dust and any residue that will interfere with adhesion. Then you want to mask off any parts that you don't want paint on, just to be safe. Use common sense and proper safety equipment when handling any paint. No reducer or hardener is needed, just a thorough mixing and it's ready to apply. The first coat needs to go on fairly light, but still a nice even coat with good coverage. Take your time and don't splatter any paint. Try not to get any runs or drips, as this extends the dry time of the paint. After 15 to 20 minutes of flash time, apply a second, heavier coat. A third may be necessary depending on coverage and color, but ours looked great with just 2. After your final coat, let it dry for at least 2 hours before unmasking and installing your wheels. And allow the paint to fully cure for 24 hours before regular use. This is one of those really great detail tricks that will give your vehicle a little more sparkle with little or no maintenance. These sand-colored Packard fenders will serve as a good example of what you can do with dull, lifeless metallic colors, but also what happens when you overbuff and burn through the surface. A lot of 60s and 70s cars have single-stage enamel or lacquer paint that's seen better days. If a repaint is not in the picture, buffing can really help out your paint finish. After cleaning, I place a piece of masking paper over our fenders so we can get a good comparison. I'm using a 3-step compound system by Norton, but there are alternatives available. Coarse cutting cream is the first stage, followed by lighter, less abrasive compounds and steps. Clear-coated finishes have that layer of protection over the pigment that single-stage finishes just don't have, so you've really got to be careful when buffing them out. You can ruin a paint job very quickly. I've seen it happen many times. If you use a different polish, use a different pad. Don't cross-contaminate. We're using a lighter polish, and the pads in this system are color-coded to correspond. I'll clean the surface with a microfiber cloth and add our second compound. You don't want to use too much compound. It just makes a mess and you end up wearing it or slinging it all over everything else in the room. A dime to a quarter-size blob is plenty. I always like to spritz a little water on my surfaces to keep from dry buffing. And when I buff, I'm using light and even pressure. Slow, steady movements. You want to control your equipment at all times. The third step is a machine glaze with a fine foam pad. Again, a different color and a very different texture. I clean the surface and add a dime-sized blob of polish. Lubricate my pad and surface and start buffing. I finish up by hand buffing with my microfiber cloth and gently give it a final polish. The difference between our before and after is obvious. We've greatly improved the gloss, which brings back the richness of the color. But here's the danger in buffing single-stage metallics. I've buffed completely through this peaked edge and down to the original paint job without realizing it. And on a customer's car, that could mean a repaint. Just remember to use caution. Over buffing can ruin a paint job. This is a fairly common situation as well. A vehicle that was painted a non-clear coat color at the factory has been repaired with a base coat clear coat system. This looks great until the original paint starts to fade at a different rate than the new clear coat, which hardly fades at all. While this can be buffed and polished to look nice again, keep in mind that without that layer of clear coat protection, you're buffing off more and more strength and color every time you buff, and that eventually the vehicle will need repainting. This car has black plastic accents and handles. Compound will stain them, so I mask them off with automotive masking tape to protect them. Rubbing compound can be aggressive, so I also mask off painted areas that I'm not buffing to protect them from debris and swirl marks. With my panels clean and protected, I start buffing with the medium-grade automotive rubbing compound. The results are almost instant, and you can see a nice finish hiding under that oxidized layer. Hold your buffer flat while working, with one edge slightly raised, and make sure you have enough compound so that your pad is never dry. Using a little water and a microfiber cloth, I hand rub the residue off the panel. Now I'll finish the panel off with a hand polish to even out the gloss. Turning your cloth frequently helps speed up the process and make sure that you have a clean contact with your painted surface. I'll remove my masking tape and use a soft bristled brush to remove any compound or polish that's been forced into the crevices. Don't leave this step too long. Once some compounds harden, they can be extremely difficult to remove, and car wax just plain looks bad on panel edges. Our door looks like we painted it instead of buffed it. And with a gloss on the surface where we can actually see the color, it now matches the clear-coated panels. Rubbing out a panel like this may only be borrowing time, and it might only last a couple of months before it needs doing again, but it's a nice short-term fix.
Before color sanding and buffing, you want to make sure that you know the type of surface that you're working with. There's a couple of different ways to test this, the first and easiest one being simply sanding the surface. And if you pull up the color on the paper that you're sanding, you know that it's a single stage finish, and you got to be a little more careful with buffing. This could be an enamel, a lacquer, or a urethane. It's a single stage though. Another method of testing is to put a strong solvent on the finish and see if it moves or shifts the finish. We're going to start with an eyedropper. Now you can see immediately what the acetone does. See that? It's absolutely shifted the surface. We know to be very careful when we're buffing this. We use our same solvent on the red car. And it's undamaged, and it pulls up, and there's no red pigment on our rag. So we know that this is a clear coat finish. It's thermoset. It's not going to go anywhere, and we're safe to color sand and buff.
Rail dust, overspray, bugs, tree sap, and road tar can look bad and may actually ruin your vehicle's paint job. Clay Magic has been around for a few years, and it's a great but well-kept secret. Apply the lubricating spray and lightly rub the surface with the clay bar into the finish. You'll be able to feel when it's clean, and then you can move on to the next section. The clay lifts out the dirt and debris, and the lubricating spray actually keeps it from scratching back into the finish. This process also works great on glass, chrome, and fiberglass as well. When you're finished, store the reusable clay bar back in its box for the next time. Dry the panel off with a soft towel, then use a small amount of the supplied wax to polish and protect the panel. Microfiber is the only polishing cloth I use anymore. They work great on almost anything. The biggest thing you'll notice after a clay magic treatment is the smoothness of the panel. Compared to the untreated surface, it feels like silk.
Now this car looks great. It's very shiny. However, there's a layer of dust on here that can be very damaging to the paint. Fortunately, there's some great products that we can use on this. Eliminate the dust and give yourself a quick detail while you're at it. This detailing spray is very simple to use. Just spritz it on and take a microfiber cloth and just gently rub. And it not only eliminates the dust, but it does a very nice job on the gloss too. I've seen a lot of people really struggle trying to apply vinyl pinstripe tape. It's just not that difficult. I've got some great tips for you, but before we go on and stripe our car, it's got to be clean. We're using a regular aerosol glass cleaner.
Aerosol glass cleaner contains alcohol and will remove solvent-based as well as organic contamination from painted surfaces.
The vinyl stripe is sandwiched in between a layer of cellophane on the top and paper on the back to protect the adhesive. The cellophane on top acts as a great guide and will help you actually apply the stripe, so leave it on. You're also going to need a single-edged razor blade to trim your edges. So we'll get that started. Be very careful when handling these. I'm going to set mine right up there for now. Now, I've seen a lot of guys try and put this stuff on an inch at a time, and what you end up with is it's just, and I'm exaggerating, I guess, but it's really hard to make a straight line a little bit at a time. Something like that doesn't help. You can use the tension of the tape itself to really help you. So here's what I suggest. Tack it at the front, and without peeling any of the backing off, go ahead and stretch it out and get as much tape as you're going to need in one cut, all the way to the back. Take it off, just tear it neatly, and then try not to let your stripe hit the floor at all, because the possibility of getting dirt and stuff in it. Now, it almost doesn't really matter what our stripe tape is doing on the front, because we can reapply this and pull it, and you'll see what I'm talking about later. One thing you do want to be aware of is your transitions over your panels need to kind of happen together. So we've got that, and as I'm pulling, I'm peeling off the white paper behind it, and I can gently touch the adhesive without really messing it up. And now here's the trick. What you want to do is grab one end, and you can eyeball it. You can look down the side, and you can actually just gently lay it on top. Now we're following the style line of this particular car right up to the quarter, and we're going to do a decorative end. But before we do that, we're just going to let that sit there, and we're going to go on to the front. The styling of the front end of this car is pretty aggressive and kind of sloped, so we can't just come straight across. We want to follow the natural style lines of the vehicle. So what we're going to do is just take our stripe that's lightly tacked on and just lift it, just gently lift it. There we go. And use tension. We're tugging it just a little bit. And we're eyeballing at the same time to make sure our line is straight, and that's good. And we're going to come down. I don't know, let's get creative, let's do something. Here's where your razor blade comes in handy. So I'm thinking that, I don't know, let's do just a line like that. Now I want to separate my cellophane from the actual stripe. And I take the large stripe, which is the top one in this case, and it's slanted down. I remove the cellophane from my narrow stripe. There she comes. Peeling the cellophane back so I can see what I'm doing. Now this is just sort of a gentle pressure. What we're going to do here, I don't know. Let's make a loop. We'll come up and back down into our point. It's just limitless what you can do. And we'll take our blade and trim, and we're done with this end. Now we're ready to move on down the rest of the side of the car. And we're peeling our cellophane back at the same time as we're pressing the stripe down. It's just a real easy motion. Now before you go any further, it's a really good idea to get into the habit of trimming your tape at the edges. Now don't cut it down the middle and wrap it. What you want to do is trim it about a 1/16 from the edge. This allows it to contract as it ages, and it won't give you a noticeable transition. Looks nice and factory, just like that. So we'll continue on, backing up, pulling our cellophane as we're pressing it down. Same number on our driver's side door gap. And you can just make a gentle slice, doesn't cut the paint. Bring your blade up, pull your excess away, and we're moving on. Now I want to do another end towards the back end of this quarter panel, so I'm not going to press it down past this. That adhesive will hold it in place. We'll get our cellophane out of the way because that's just the kind of folks that we are. And now I'm going to take the big stripe pulling it up just really gently. What are we going to do? Let's do another loop down, come back here, and just roll it off into a gentle point. And then we'll take our blade, trim, make sure we went all the way through that. And I'm stopping right after the stripe so I don't cut into the paint. So we've got an angular stripe surrounded with the lines of the car. The whole side is done in moments. Now once you get used to this technique, you can just fly through this stuff. You can get really creative on the ends, do whatever you want to do. That hopefully takes the mystery out of doing the vinyl pinstripes. The rest is up to you. For removing pinstripe, there's a couple different things you want to consider. This stripe has been on here for years. It's brittle, it's hard, it needs to come off. The easiest thing to do, you think, is to get a razor knife and get underneath the stripe and try and peel it off this way. The problem with that is that it's very easy to make a gouge and really ruin your paint job, cause yourself a redo. Fortunately, there's a tool that's very easy. It takes all the breath and all the work out of this. It's just an eraser on a drill. Very cool. You can see what it's doing. It's just rolling the stripe right off of there. It's non-destructive. Very nice tip.
Bright polished chrome looks great. Dull, dirty old chrome looks like, well, dull, dirty chrome. Here's a simple but effective technique for polishing your chrome plating. I cleaned the surface of this old fender molding with steel wool and a spray glass cleaner. Chrome plating is very thin and really quite porous on the surface. The steel wool fibers can get into those spaces and clean very well. I don't like to use polish for a cleaner on any surface, so with my molding clean first, I use a metal polish to finish the job. Just like on your painted surfaces, you need a little protection from the elements, and metal polish seals out moisture and gives an enhanced shine, just like waxing the paint on your car. We've all seen chrome get surface rust on it. That just illustrates that it's not bulletproof and is susceptible to moisture damage. With my polishing cloth, yep, you guessed it, microfiber, I buff the excess polish off to achieve my final gloss. This part shined up nicely and is now ready for reassembly. Even if you have brand new chrome, the same rules apply. To give it a layer of protection and a little extra gloss, follow the same procedures as with the old chrome. Apply your metal polish and rub it evenly over the entire piece. Then hand buff to a final gloss. Polished aluminum parts and accessories look great. The problem with aluminum is that it oxidizes fast and is inherently soft. I'll repair this gouge in the pulley cover starting with 220 grit Norton sandpaper. I keep the repair small and just try to smooth out the damage. Being soft also makes aluminum easy to repair, so it's a double-edged sword of sorts. Once I've leveled out my damage with 220 grit, I jump up to 320 grit, basically to repair the scratches I put in with the 220 paper. It's a progressive repair until we get to the point to where we can polish. I expand past my 220 grit sanded area and feather out the repair slightly. Next, I step up to 500 grit and again expand my repair area even wider than the 320. I also lighten up on my pressure and make sure I'm not making gouges or excessive sanding marks in the undamaged metal. The first buffing wheel is coarse, and I use a Triple E compound that works great for aluminum and soft metals, and apply it to the wheel until the surface changes color. The buffing wheel is turning towards me, and I hold the part about 2/3 down, which gives me the best pressure while not allowing the part to get grabbed from my hands. This could not only damage your parts, but you can cause serious damage to your body as well. I monitor my progress often and add compound when I see that the wheel isn't really doing anything. I'm wearing gloves and a face shield. This is not an option. You need to be very careful with any power tools and protect yourself at all times. Once I'm satisfied that I've gotten all of the sanding scratches out of the repair, I move to the fine polishing wheel. I'm using White Rouge compound for the final polish, which happens much more quickly than the initial stages. I also polish the rest of the surface of my part so the repair blends in. Using a fine metal polish, I polish by hand to remove any smudges or residue on the part. My repair looks good and the part has been buffed up to its former glory, but we're not done yet. Like I said before, aluminum is a soft metal and oxidizes quickly, so it requires more maintenance than chrome. But if you seal it, you can get as much as 2 years of maintenance-free shine out of your polished or billet aluminum. This comes as a kit and includes everything you need except water, which we filled our bottle up with to the recommended level. The mix is 15 parts of tap water to 1 part of concentrated cleaner, and mix and blend thoroughly. The success of this procedure depends on having a perfectly clean surface, free of debris or contamination in the pores of the aluminum, so several applications of cleaner may be necessary. Once your part is clean and dry, mix both parts of the epoxy sealer together. Keep in mind that you have a fixed shelf life once the epoxy is mixed, but it will last up to 2 weeks if refrigerated. It's still best to have all your parts prepped before beginning the procedure. Mix and blend the two components thoroughly, then apply with a soft, dry towel to the part. Wet the whole surface and make sure you don't miss any spots. You don't have to rub it in, it will flow into the pores of the aluminum on its own. Wipe the excess off and don't worry about a haze or a rainbow film that's left on the part. That's normal and will buff off later. After the recommended 12 to 24 hour dry period, you can apply the final sealer onto your polished parts. Unpolished aluminum does not need this step. This sealer has a 10-day cure window, and although the part can be handled once it's dry, care needs to be taken if you need to wash it. Use a mild soapy water with a soft cloth. The part looks great, the repair is almost invisible, and I won't have to polish it again for a couple of years. You gotta love that. The Flitz polisher comes with its own polish and fits onto a drill. I apply the polishing cream to my wheel and rub it around evenly. Then I start polishing. The fingers on the wheel get into the crevices and really work the polish into the tight spots. If you have spoked wheels, this saves a ton of rubbing and does a really nice job. Afterwards, I use a soft cloth to hand polish and buff to a final gloss. Stainless steel used to be the main material for brightwork and trim parts on cars. It's easily maintained, never rusts, and is repairable. These rocker moldings from a 67 GTO look their age, and they've got several dents and scrapes in them. First, I clean off the molding to get a closer look at the surface. Glass cleaner and steel wool work well for this too. There are a couple of obvious dents in them and a little road rash, but they're definitely savable. Even severe damage can be repaired, and sometimes these pieces are irreplaceable or very hard to find. Using a hard-faced hammer and a special anvil, I straighten out the obvious damage on the mounting flange. The dent is fixed the same way, using a hammer and anvil to support the metal and slowly work the steel back into its intended shape. Now I'm using a curved-faced body hammer that closely matches the crown of the part, and gently asking the metal to go back where it belongs. Can you see them again? Not really good now. It's a matter of patience and observation, but eventually the damage is smoothed out. Sort of. The basic crown is back in the panel, but I've created high spots with my hammer blows, so I come back again with a pick hammer and work the high spots. It's a process of working both sides until you've smoothed out the metal, and it takes some doing, but it's definitely worth the time spent to have all original bright work on this car. I've got my part mounted with soft-faced jaws in my bench vise, and I use a fine draw file to level the surface a step further. Keeping my repair small, I work on the surface until it shows me where I'm at. I can still see some low spots, so I go back to my anvil and fine-tune the repair even more. This process takes some time, but it's time well spent and ultimately will pay off, so be patient. When I'm satisfied with this stage of repair, I'll move on to the finishing stages, which include sanding the file marks using progressively finer grits of paper on a DA sander. I'm starting off with 220 again to level off the file marks, and although some people prefer to use wet sanding for these steps, I've found that dry sanding works well too. After I can't see scratches anymore, I graduate to 320 grit paper and go over my work again. Back on the piece. Next, I step up to 500 grit and go over my 320 scratches, smoothing things out further. Final sanding is done with 800 grit, and I sand until I see a smooth, satiny finish with no scratches showing through. Just like buffing paint, you don't want to cross-contaminate your buffer or pads. And we've been buffing aluminum, which takes a different set of compounds. I use a spur and carefully dress the face of both buffing wheels to clean them. I start off with a spiral ventilated compound, but for stubborn or deeper scratches, you can use an emery compound first. I load the wheel with the compound and firmly hold my part 2/3 of the way down the wheel. I apply gentle pressure. I slowly work the surface, adding compound as needed, and checking my progress often. I use different angles to access the repair, while not compromising my buffing position. It's easy to lose concentration and have the wheel grab your part right out of your hands at 3600 RPM, so be very careful when choosing how you hold the part to the wheel. When I can no longer see sanding marks, I move on to the polishing step. This step is where you see the work pay off, and it's starting to look really nice, but polish until your surface is consistent and even. With all the scratches polished out, a final hand buff with metal polish is done to enhance the gloss, but also to protect the surface. Everything looks really good. I've revived the molding and effectively repaired the dents in the surface.
So thanks for watching that. It's fun for me too, but here's some of the questions that I wanted to answer. So I didn't catch this guy's name, but he says, love your willingness to share your knowledge. Question, how critical is it to stick to a paint system? Example, if what I'm using is PPG paint, must I use PPG primers, sealers, cleaners, body fillers, etc.? I'd love to know some fundamentals on how to know which manufacturers and materials are compatible with one another. Thanks so much. So here's the deal. I will never recommend that you mix and match paint systems. I'm always going to stay within that family of chemistry. As I've talked and had discussions about this very topic with different paint manufacturers, it's pretty important to stick within that family of chemistry, and here's why. Each manufacturer has their own calculated compositions and their own resins that are compatible with each other. And for instance, if you use a PPG primer with somebody else's epoxy, there's a chance that you're going to have incompatible components. So I'm always going to recommend that you're going to stay within a family of chemistry. And here's the deal with that. You're thinking, well, if I use PPG, do I have to have PPG everything and top shelf this? It's going to cost me a lot of money. Calm down. You can use PPG stuff and their secondary line Omni stuff. It's their budget-friendly line. It's still, again, within the family of chemistry. Every paint manufacturer has a secondary line or a fleet line that's compatible. So it doesn't matter if it's inexpensive paint or expensive paint, it's all expensive paint. If it's a premium line, if it's a budget line, it's all expensive. So spend as much as you possibly can on it. Don't play Mr. Wizard. Don't play bench chemist. Stay within the family of chemistry, and if you have to, reach for the less expensive lines. There's compatibility within that paint line. So that's my best advice. And trust me, I've been bit trying to save money on little things that eventually don't matter. Here's the next question. Hi, Kevin. I have a DIY paint booth in my shop. And I've seen the online calculators for determining airflow in CFM. Those numbers are geared for a professional booth. Well, yeah, for sure. And the science of airflow is it's not for the faint of heart, and it's not for the people that are allergic to math like me. In my Paintucation University course, I actually show a lesson on how to calculate airflow in CFM using an anemometer, and it made my brain hurt doing that. So here's this question. What does a DIY guy realistically need for acceptable airflow? So this is a seat of the pants question, and it's a seat of the pants answer. All the paint manufacturers require adequate airflow. So the perfect conditions that everything is designed to work best under are 70 to 72 degrees Fahrenheit, 30 to 50% relative humidity, and adequate airflow. As long as you have air flowing over top of the workpiece during and after paint application is almost as important as during, then you're going to effectively pull off the VOC off of that material. So I've done things like this. If I don't have very good airflow in my paint booth, I'll set up a fan to go over top of the finish after I've finished sprayed, after it's flashed, after it's even dried a touch. I'll keep a fan moving over the top of it. And the reason being is that you want to pull that VOC off of the top surface so it doesn't rain back down in. So adequate airflow means just have some air moving around it. You don't need a hurricane force wind, and dead airflow is really not your friend. So something in between, I'm going to say a box fan and a professional paint booth, you're going to have adequate airflow. I'm sorry if that's not a concise answer. Just make sure it's enough to get rid of your overspray while you're spraying, and just continue that. All right, next question. Kevin, will you please cover the easiest way to repaint factory truck steel wheels? This is a good one. So the easiest way to do that is wheels, they get road rash, they get scarred up, sometimes they're rusty, but they look really good when they're cleaned up and painted. So here's my recipe. This is what I used to do. It's what I still do. I will sandblast the steel and then come back, super clean the metal after it's been blasted, and then come back with an epoxy primer, and then come back with either single stage or a two-stage paint. Sandblast, epoxy, then paint. So if you don't have a sandblaster set up, here's a cool hack. I used to find my local monument place in whatever town I was in and slide them a couple of bucks. Offer them some side money, slide them a little money on the side, and they'll work you in. When they've got the blaster up and running, they can blast off your parts, and just don't let them sit too long before you take them back and paint them. But that'll save you some money if you don't have a sandblasting outfit. So again, sandblast, epoxy, top coat. Make sure you blow out between the steps, otherwise the sand can come back through. Yeah, common sense. So here's another one. This is from Justin from Utah. I finally wrote a name down. Hi, Kevin. Please read me. You got it. Question about high heat paint. Can you share your knowledge about what to use when painting exhaust headers and turbos? Ooh, this is a good one. Also, primers or no primer? Clear or no clear? Will 2K clear from Eastwood hold up to high heat or oil and gas spills? Well, that's more than about high heat paint, Justin, so calm down. Watched since trucks, thank you. So Justin from Utah, here's the basic rule about most catalyzed urethane paint. It can withstand temperatures up to about 250, maybe 260 degrees. Then, when your substrate temperature gets past that, you're going to risk discoloration and possibly even blistering. So when I'm doing a Concours restoration on an engine, I'm painting the engine block. Well, guess what? All the factory engine blocks had burnt off paint around the exhaust manifold. So that's fine. If you're doing a high-end custom and you don't want that look, or you've got an exhaust manifold and you don't want the paint burnt off, use a high heat paint, not an automotive paint. Some of the Eastwood stuff is ceramic embedded. I haven't played with all of it, but they've got some that's I think will withstand up to 400 degrees. You're just going to have to read the TDS and read the labels on that. But the best product I've found for super high heat applications is a product called Cerakote. It's a ceramic paint, and it was formulated for munitions and guns. equipment that needs a super thin film build that's high heat resistant and very, very impact resistant. Cerakote, I've done complete exhaust systems, turbos, turbo mounts with Cerakote. It will not burn off. If you remember my cetane pickup truck, we did the whole entire exhaust system from the Y pipe out of the turbo valley all the way down, even the exhaust tip, and it never crusted up. It never, and it's got a cool iridescent look too. And I believe that Cerakote also has a shiny clear coat if you want to do a two-stage on it. Make sure you download the TDS for Cerakote. They're very, very picky about their prep steps and their application. Also, wear your PPE with Cerakote. There's some, the particles in it are not good. With any of this stuff, please be proactive with PPE, and Cerakote is no different. So yeah, so that's my recommendation. Some ceramic paint, that's going to get you there. Cerakote is the best brand I've found. Most other paint, it's going to melt off at about 250, 260 degrees. So that's kind of what you got. So one more question. Would you do a paint job with only rattle cans? No sanding blocks or DAUs? So it's torture for me to even think about that. I'm not dogging anybody that's done that. Heck, Derek did it, and whatever. I've seen guys. There's lots of guys on YouTube that have done rattle can paint jobs, and I wouldn't be any different if I did that. If a guy wanted to paint motorcycle tins or something absolutely dirt cheap, rattle cans, maybe under 150 bucks, total materials and all that stuff, maybe only from Walmart or something. And also he says you should do builds and not just paint work. I agree with that, and we're getting to that. We're going to do some fun stuff coming up, so please say subscribe. So here's the rattle can thing. Rattle cans are expensive now. They used to be $2 or $3. Now you're paying for decent paint, for decent rattle can paint, you're paying $8, $10, $15 per rattle can. So are they really less expensive? I don't know. So here's the problem with paint. And I address this in some of my training. I've got a section called Spray Can 101, and we address how to properly spray with spray can paints. There's no such thing as bad paint. There's only misunderstood paint. And if you misunderstand rattle can paint, then you're not going to get good results with it. Paint has requirements. It needs flash time between coats. It needs overlap during application. And it needs a dry time for it to cure, which means completely solve and evacuate. Even if it doesn't have a catalyst, paint still has to cure. So it needs those things, and it needs a clean environment. It needs adequate airflow. So if you treat your rattle can just like professional paints, you can get professional results. I've seen it. So can I do a paint job with rattle cans? As a matter of fact, I've got some Harley tins sitting up in the training center, and you've just inspired me for a new video. So we're going to do a rattle can video, not with the tricky catalyzed stuff with the hardener in it. That's a really neat product too, by the way. But we're going to do traditional rattle can, enamel, something like that. We'll do that in an upcoming video. I can't tell you exactly when, because I'm kind of stacking up with content here that I've got to produce. I'm so stoked about this stuff. Anyway, so no sanding blocks or DAUs. I know what he's getting at. He wants a real-world scenario here, but the truth is, if you want really nice results, you got to step up. You have to have enough material, and you have to have enough equipment and tools to do the job properly. So I'm not saying you can't get a nice job with rattle cans, but you just have to understand what the paint is. Here's the last thing I'm going to say about rattle cans. When you look at a traditional spray gun, and I don't have any right here in my office, you're going to see the fluid tip. And it's a big old fluid tip. Even at 1.3, which is very small for painting, it's 1.3 millimeters. That's a lot of space for fluid to come out and then get bombarded by the air to atomize it and make a coating that can transfer through the air and then fall down in particles and be wet. Look at the fluid tip of a spray can. It's tiny. It's super tiny. It's smaller than the head of a pin. So if you think about that, what has to happen for paint to come out of that small fluid tip? It has to be super thinned down. It has to be so solvent charged that it's so thin that between the propellant in the can and that tiny little orifice, when you press the button, it's got to be super thin. It's thinner than water thin, about the thinness of isopropyl alcohol thin. So what does that mean? It means it's mostly solvent. So if you have 2 coats of a professional paint, you're probably going to need 6 on a RattleCAD paint. That's just something to have back here in the memory banks. Just remember that. It's super thin by design, so it'll come out of that tiny fluid tip, so you have to kind of overcompensate. And with every subsequent coat, you need flash time in between them, so you can't just hammer it on and hope. One coat, that's coloring with rattle cans. That's not painting with rattle cans. And we're gonna do a video. We're gonna do a video. It's really good. So I just want to say, the awards behind me, they're Telly Awards for independent film production, some for Hands on Cars, some for Paintucation, and this one on the end here, again, trip down memory lane. I won a Telly Award for the video content that you guys just saw for extreme detailing, and I'm proud of it, man. Is it perfect? No. Did I do the best job on delivery? No. But the information's valid, and we're going to continue to put it out. So, that said, it's time for me to go hydrate. Watch for a new episode coming up that's all Q&A. We're going to draw from your questions, and thank you so much for sending all the questions. The other thing is this. I've started a new series of videos called What'll It Take? Inspecting cars that I find, and I give an educated guesstimate as to what it might take to get them back up and running and back into good shape again. It's just kind of a thing. I want you to look at that and tell me what you think about those two. And lots more coming your way. I just want to say YouTube is way more fun than TV ever was. So thank you. Subscribe. Make sure you tell your friends to subscribe. Ring the bell. You'll get the notifications on new content coming out. So thanks, guys, and we'll see you on the next one.